Hello, everyone, especially you. Hey, welcome. This is another episode of the SoapyRao show. Of course, why would it be anything else, right? What a stupid introduction, Sandeep. I mean, you never get it right. I don't know, man. What the hell? Unnecessary exuberance, excitement. But I think I'm a little chirpy, not chirpy, but I read this news article. Of course, it has to start with that. Yeah, it does, because it's funny. Where it was more of a tweet. I didn't go into details. As you know, the research on this podcast is extremely deep, profound, well. What's the word? Fact checked. I don't really have a fact checker. I have a fact checker. No, don't say such things. You'll be cancelled. But it's funny. It's along those themes of cancelled. So apparently a couple of woke activists, or activists who are woke, whichever order you want to put those two words in, are a bit... are in a bit of a bind, if you want to call it, because they accused a primary school. I don't know where this is. I'm sure you can find the tweet or the article. It's by the BBC. They accused a primary school of hiring a DJ who was going to appear in blackface. Oh, you know that thing. That's worse than genocide, according to the woke people. So he was accused, or the school is accused of hiring a person who was going to appear. First of all, which school is this? Primary school that has a DJ. Yeah, my primary school. Yeah, it wasn't called a primary school. It's just like school. That's all we knew it as. School. We went to school. Primary, secondary, tertiary. I have no clue what the adjectives were. But anyway, it was a primary school which had a DJ. Of course, kids nowadays at the ripe age of 7 are going into like psychedelic trance, EDM. So they got this DJ. And these activists accused this DJ of appearing in blackface. But here's the catch. He's actually black. Ooh, man. That's what happens, I suppose, if you keep pointing fingers. Yeah, they're going to get eaten up or burnt. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, do you almost feel like saying, yeah, we kind of saw this coming? Because it's such a frantic kind of scenario where you just want to kind of bring down everyone around you. It's kind of like carpet bombing, which a lot of the people, I think, happened in the Kosovo war, like a lot of carpet bombing. And there are a lot of people who get wrongly caught up in the fire, civilian casualties. They're called collateral. And this is not that situation. Of course, it's a very different scenario. But if you go around saying everyone's bad and everyone doesn't suit your agenda or everyone is not woke, you're going to make these mistakes. And not even a mistake, it's a total disaster, right? Like, you stupid people are going and accusing someone of being what they are by saying they're being someone else. It's ridiculous. These people need to be, I don't know, what do you think the punishment should be? Or should there be consequences for making such accusations? Because I feel when you do this, the real issue is kind of distracted. You get distracted from the real issue. Like, you're like, oh my God, these people. And 90% of the news is this, of I wouldn't say fake news, but a lot of these people who are so caught up in their own cause and their own thing. They're so self-righteous about, I am going to change the narrative. I am going to be more inclusive. I'm going to be more diverse. And as a result, you kind of make a complete blunder of things. And these are the people walking around using the word privilege. So it's almost like a weapon they want to use. And they're like, I have to acknowledge my privilege. Okay. They're like, you have to acknowledge your privilege. I'm like, no, I'll do what I need to do because I have this thing, which is a moral compass, a conscience that has developed through the various kinds of things I've seen in my life, the way I've been conditioned, the way I've been brought up by my family, the way I've interacted with people, the way I have this kind of barometer for how things I perceive should be right or wrong. So what happened there? You can't impose your sense of what you think I should be by using these words like privilege. Okay, I have privilege. Cool. I'm going to move on. You have a problem with that? Yeah, because it's almost like they're trying to catch you in the act, right? Like, I don't know what act, but they have this sense of what, and I mean, they very sort of specifically, like, it's not everyone. This is not like a big community of woke people. It's a lot of individuals. And I say an individual who kind of manifests this as the larger trait in their humanness, right? And I get very annoyed with that, because you can be woke, you can be inclusive, you can do what the hell you want to live your life. You have the right to do that. But when you kind of collectively either create a mob that kind of attacks an individual, or as an individual you have this larger trait that comes out and you constantly are sort of hanging on to it because that's the only sense of identity that you can hold on to, and then kind of bring down people, I think that's BS. Bullshit. Yeah, just in case you didn't get it. And this is an example. Privilege. I mean, yeah, okay, man, I didn't have a say in it, but I'm thankful, of course, but I'm not going to be acknowledging it everywhere I go, saying, excuse me, do you see this privilege? I acknowledge it. Yes, I am totally at peace with my, and I'm so sorry that you don't have this privilege. No, there is certain things given to you, certain things taken away. That's the nature of the universe. And if you don't believe in the larger design and the larger plan, and you want to say, use words like karma and how your actions determine it, fair enough. Maybe previous lives, past lives, present life, there's a philosophy for everyone, and there's a philosophy for every situation. So whatever you buy into, whatever you believe in, don't blame me for your situation, and I'm not going to blame you for my situation. I think it's not going to serve anyone, and it's a total mess. That's why we are where we are. And you shoving your face in my face saying, you better acknowledge your privilege, isn't going to help you, for sure. And it's probably going to annoy the hell out of me. I mean, it will annoy them. Who'll be lying, right? And I feel that's the kind of place where we're stuck right now. It's just too much noise. Everyone's being loud, everyone's being obnoxious, and everyone's sort of just saying, you know what, I'm not going to look within and address the various kind of complexities that go into making me who I am, the strengths, the weaknesses, the flaws, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think once we start there, it just sort of, it's like a playground in school where there's a DJ pretending to have blackface. No, where it's tea time. Everyone's out screaming in the playground, having a good time. That's how maybe it should be. But imagine screaming and everyone's screaming at each other because they're not happy on their tea break or their lunch break. We had a tea break. How cute was that? Tea break. And I just said the word cute as an adult man. That's cute. Crazy. And pretty much it's like go back to your classrooms and just think about, yeah, maybe it's a bad analogy, but I think it's a good analogy. So I think we just need to hey, look within, man, because there's so much there to understand, to sift through, to appreciate, to forgive, to accept, to say, you know what, I was wrong. And once you start from there, I think the noise settles down. And while I'm on that topic, I'm going to introduce my guest on today's episode because she's a fantastic human being. She's a lovely person who agreed to come on this podcast. She's got a TED Talk that has done so well. It was, I think, the first TED Talk to go viral back in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. The talk and the book is called My Stroke of Insight. I will put the link in the description. Of course, the talk, I think, is also named, I think, the same, if I'm not mistaken. My guest name is Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. She's a neuroanatomist and a neurologist. She has experienced situations or a situation in her life that, well, let me rephrase it. She went through a life-changing experience, and fortunately for all of us and for her as well, she was able to document it, she was able to live through it, and she was able to have a profound revelation while living through this stroke. It was a thing that, triggered this hemorrhage, which had consequences for her. But fortunately, she was able to make a full recovery and come out on the other side stronger, more appreciative of the universe and the divine, and she'll tell you in her own words what that did to her. Her new book is called Whole Brain Living. Of course, link to that in the description as well. And overall, a lovely conversation with a truly remarkable human being. I'm really lucky to have her on the podcast, and you guys are really lucky that she's agreed to talk to me. And I really hope you enjoy the conversation because it is enjoyable in its truest sense. Of course, I'd like to thank you for being who you are and listening to me week in, week out on the SoapyRao Show. Much appreciated, my friend. Do share this episode if you like it with someone you like or someone you think might benefit from it. But just, I think, in essence, enjoy it. Sit back. Yeah, I always get this wrong. You know it. This is the unique nature of the SoapyRao Show. But a big shout out to Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. All her details, you can reach out to her. The website is all in the description of this episode. And without further ado, let's go into the conversation with Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. Thank you. Till next time. Goodbye. God bless. Take care of yourselves. Cheers. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, welcome to the SoapyRao Show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm excited to be with you. I think we're going to have fun today.
Yes, we are. And I'm so glad that you're doing well. And for everyone who's listening right now, I think you've got a tremendous story which started back in 1996, 97. And I think for those of the people who've been living under a rock and who haven't watched your TED Talk, I think that's the first order of business. But I think we're going to cover all of that here. But I'm so glad you've recovered and recovered so well. And you're here today to share your story. And And you know what fascinates me is the lockdown kind of made all of us sort of examine our lives in what we're doing and why we're doing. But you seem to have a much longer history with your mind and your body. Of course, your area of interest and your area of expertise is neuroanatomy and neuroscience. But what I found fascinating when I read your book, of course, I read the second one, I haven't read the first one, unfortunately, is the way you were able to sort of witness your brain as an insider and an outsider. So, can you just tell me how it was for you after being through so much? How was the pandemic, the lockdown, and people sort of this frenzy of panic and uncertainty? How did you approach it, and how did you approach helping people around you? Because I'm sure you must have been a sort of a rock and a sense of a strong pillar for people around you, right?
First of all, I'm biologically based. So I am a neuroanatomist. I study the anatomy of the brain. I think in terms of cells. And so and I like current events. So I was very tuned in when the news of COVID started coming up. So I was actually paying attention early. And because I'm biologically based, I'm kind of been waiting for a biological phenom to come and hit humanity. I mean, it only makes sense that one of these viruses would, catch on and really do some destruction. So it didn't come as a surprise because I think biologically, I think what took me by surprise was how we as humanity managed or did not manage the crisis situation. And just even the denial that there was a problem out there, and then we're watching this virus come across the ocean, and it's like, okay, well, I'm a biological. We're in America, we don't wear masks. We have never in my lifetime had to wear a mask. And so, we can watch the news and see, because of pollution reasons in other parts of the world, other cultures do wear masks, but it's not been the American way. So I thought, okay, well, how's that going to go? And it went pretty much along the lines of the two halves of the brain. Half of us decided this was a real threat and we're going to protect ourselves using a mask. And the other half are going to say this isn't real and we're going to live through it and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I mean, it was just fascinating. So for me, it was curiosity came through. And the more curious I was, my character one of my left rational thinking brain came online and said, okay, what can I do in order to protect myself? Let's take those steps. And so I did. I bought the masks. I bought the sanitizer. I bought my little UV light for my groceries, But I actually believed that I could, if I worked really hard, I could protect myself. And so I did what I could do in order to protect myself, to encourage people I love to protect themselves. But then it really became, okay, my castle is my sanctuary. What do I like to do? Now we're all locked down, we're all locked in. And fortunately, I have an art space where I can do my stained glass. I did a lot of stained glass. I'm a stone carver. I have a place where I can carve stone. I did a lot of stone carving. I had been working on gathering material for creating this book. I wrote the book. Last year, during the second year, I podcasted the book, So I showed up 100% in what can I do on the edge of safety in order to feel like I'm covered as best as I can. Right. But I have a real relationship with the cosmic consciousness of the universe. Call that God, call that whatever you want to call that. For me, it's love. And I feel really grounded in life or beyond life because I had this amazing experience with this major hemorrhage that where I lost my left hemisphere, my relationship with the external world, and all I had was the blissful euphoria of the existence of the present moment. So I went into the pandemic with my whole brain online, my whole toolbox available, and I used all of it.
And I think that's fascinating, right? Because you talk about it in your book, which is Whole Brain Living. And I think even in your previous book, My Stroke of Insight. And, the thing is, a lot of people felt that change. Like, I'll give you an example, which is my experience of the lockdown literally saving me from myself, because I'm a stand-up comedian who sort of got caught up in the entire scheme of just doing shows, doing the repeated sort of thing without understanding why you're doing it. After a point, it just becomes sort of like muscle memory, and you kind of started out. I started out doing stand up because I like it, but of course we'll go into the aspects of the brain that sort of have these features which you talk about in the book. But very simply put, when the lockdown happened, I was faced with, okay, you have to look at what you're doing and why you're doing it, and in a very simple way, I was made to realize that, why are you doing this for yourself, or are you doing this for external validation? And when I started realizing what I want to do because I want to do it, entire sort of equation changed. So with you, you were sort of put into that situation when you had the stroke or the hemorrhage, and but how, you're a professional scientist and you look at the brain. And why did this happen in the first place? I mean, was it a sort of an accident? Was it a traumatic brain injury? What was the reason for the stroke? Because I'm not really sure if you talk about it in the new book, but you mentioned the experience of going through the stroke. But why did it happen? And was it something which you could anticipate as someone who works with the brain?
So I had a congenital malformation in the
Okay.
blood vessels of my brain. So I was born with a malformation called an arteriovenous malformation. Usually you have an artery, which is high pressure, comes in, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you go into a capillary network where all the red blood cells line up single file. And that's pretty much a no pressure zone. And then at the other end is a vein, which is a negative pressure zone that kind of sucks that up out of that capillary network and out of the extracellular matrix and carries the fluid back to the heart.
Yeah.
And I had essentially a varicose vein inside of my brain where I had a high pressure artery and a low pressure vein attached to one another without any capillary network in between.
Ooh,
So the
okay,
high pressure artery blew off the low pressure, no pressure vein. And I ended up having all that blood then go into the cell, the extracellular space between the cells in my left hemisphere. So it was a malformation that I was born with that I didn't know that I had.
That's really and I'm fascinated, of course, because I think this is very important to understand. But I think the more fascinating part is your entire journey since, and you've really documented. I think it really well. If the book is fantastic, but I want to understand, because you speak about it, and I think for people who haven't read the book, I think we'll just give a little context of what whole brain living is about and how you break down your experience with how you've made peace with, I think, first of all, understanding how the hemispheres of the brain exist, not just in the traditional way. Because if you look at certain ways in yoga, if you look at the breathing practice, they have the left hemisphere, which is connected to the right body. It's called the masculine, and the right hemisphere, which is connected to the left part of the body, which is the feminine. And then you have breathing practices, and you have ways to sort of, during the full moon, certain parts, etc. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, but I've done a little bit of reading and a few classes in this. But it's amazing how, and how did you discover that there is more to the brain than what meets the eye? Whether, some people say the left is thinking, the right is emotional, but you've gone beyond that. And did you stumble upon this through your experience, or was it sort of your experience researching this and your post recovery after this incident?
I knew what scientists were taught. I mean, I knew that what everybody was taught, and I lived through the 70s, 70s and the 80s when Dr. Sperry dissected the commissure between the two hemispheres, and we ended up with two halves of a brain, and each hemisphere had its own personality. And so I was in my prime at that point. I was at college. I was in my 20s. It was a very exciting time to be stimulated by the possibilities of the two hemispheres. And so I knew what everybody was talking about. That's all I knew. And then in neuroanatomy, I learned how the different cells communicate with one another with different chemicals and what quantities of those chemicals and the actual wiring of the brain. brain. Information comes in through the nerve, the auditory nerve. It comes in at the brainstem level. Some information passes across, some information synapses there, then they both run up bilaterally, and then they divide. So it was a mapping, if you will, of how we process information. So that was my area of expertise, was how are we wired? And that's what I was actually teaching and performing research at Harvard Medical School. I was teaching neuroanatomy and head and neck anatomy for gross anatomy. So that was my thing, but I'm a cellular anatomist. I think in terms of cells.
Yeah.
And so on the morning of the stroke, which is the first book, which it's titled My Stroke of Insight, A Brain Scientist's Personal Journey. I actually take you moment by moment by moment on the morning of the stroke for what I was experiencing, because even though circuits were going offline, I still was conscious and I still had an awareness, and I could still keep, when your arm goes paralyzed, you're aware, oh my gosh, the cells in this motor cortex of my brain are now swimming in a pool of blood. And so my arm is paralyzed. My auditory system had gone offline. Eventually my vocalization went offline, but it's circuits. These are cells and circuits. So I got to watch my own brain through the eyes of a neuroanatomist who thinks in these terms, watch the machine essentially go offline, 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 offline. So after 4 hours, I could not walk, talk, read, write, or recall any of my life. I became a complete infant in a woman's body. But I was still alive. I had no relationship with the external world. I had no past. I had no future. I had no perception of self. I didn't know what a mother was, much less who my mother was. I had no information about the external world being processed in that left hemisphere. But I was still alive, and I was still conscious in the present moment. And I felt open and expansive and as big as the universe. And I had none of the knowledge of the world, but I had all of the knowledge that is available to us in the absence of all that noise of the left brain. So it really became experiential. And you're exactly right. We were trained that the right hemisphere is emotion and the left hemisphere is thinking, but that's simply not true. We have emotion in each hemisphere. We have thinking in each hemisphere. And because I had this opportunity to watch the deterioration of the thinking and emotion of my left brain, I became really clear on what was I left with, because it took 8 years for me to completely recover all of those skills of the left hemisphere in order to function like a normal human being. But I never lost the understanding and perception then of what is actually going on in what we call that unconsciousness of our right brain.
Yeah, it's what's fascinating is, something like this happens, and I don't think it's a parallel that I can draw, but it's something which comes closest to me is when I was diagnosed with macular degeneration when I was 8. Literally overnight, my central vision disappeared, but I didn't have. I mean, of course, I didn't have the scientific training, but I don't even have the experiential learning of what happened, because now when I look back in hindsight, I'm like, oh, this is what happened. There was a sort of a gene. There was a gene mutation. There were a couple of mutations in one of the genes, which led to this. But it wasn't experiential at all. It's just for me. I was a child, and we'll talk about. I mean, you talk about this very, very sort of nicely when it comes to the characters, how you identify what character comes back in what form and how it manifests. But I want to understand how do you remember any of this? Because it's and do you think that because there's a thinking part to the right hemisphere of your brain, that's why you can recollect? Or because if it's so experiential and in a way divine, how do you draw it back to the normal that we call life and the real world?
Well, if you think about experience, just the phenomenon of, oh my God, I'm alive. I'm alive. I know I'm alive. How do I know I'm alive? I know I'm alive because I somehow have a consciousness that infuses organic, and I'm not dead. I'm
Yeah.
here. At least at least a part of me believes I'm here, right?
Yeah.
So I have this level of consciousness that is always there. It always exists.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the consciousness of the external world. It's not the awareness or the details of the external world. But in
Yeah.
the absence of the details, it's like in the absence of the details goes into the bigger picture. Well, am I a conscious living human being if I have destroyed the thinking portion or emotional portion of my left brain? Yeah, I'm still here. People have all kinds of gifts or not, or they're like I don't know how you are with this, but I am terrible at hearing, differentiating the sound between a her and a her, right? I mean, these
Okay.
languages that have really subtle sound differences. You have to have the differentiation training at the level of the brain, of the ear, at the level of the brain, in order to
Mm-hmm.
be able to say, okay, well, when you say it this way, it means that. And when you say it this way, it means this. And to me, it sounds the same. So I don't have
Yeah.
that differentiation, but I now have a different differentiation than the average person because I have experienced what's going on in the right hemisphere without the interference of the noise and the consciousness of that left brain, and on top of the consciousness of my right brain. So I actually became more open, more full, bigger picture perspective without the analysis of the details. So how do I remember it? Well, how do I remember anything?
Mm.
And in fact, it is the right hemisphere that remembers as a collective whole. So let's say
Mm-hmm.
there's a really important moment that happened in your life, and for me, I can tell you exactly where I was when the Twin Towers were hit. I can tell you who was there. I can tell you what smells were in the air. I can tell you about the whole experience of that moment because it was a whole moment. It wasn't, so I'm not thinking about it linearly and trying to remember and think this happened, then that happened, then this happened, then that happened. No, it was a whole experience. And that's how the right hemisphere brings in information all simultaneously. It has an explosion of the present moment. And then the left hemisphere takes that apart and starts defining these little bits of data called details so that we can actually communicate externally with one another using language in order to try to share an experience. So the two hemispheres simply process information in completely opposite ways, and then they work together in order for us to have one seamless perception of what we are in relationship to ourselves and the world around us.
So could you do this exact sort of capturization of the moment, whether it's the larger or the finer details, before your episode with the hemorrhage, or was it
No,
something?
what I
Right.
was given was really, and I'm going to go back to the word differentiation. When we're born, we're a blob of cells and a blob of energy, right?
Mm-hmm,
We
mm-hmm.
are for 9 months in the womb. The energy of this blob of organic life has multiplied cells at a rate of 250,000 cells per second. Per second, not per minute.
That's crazy.
250,000 per second. Bam, 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 right?
That's
And then
crazy.
boom, after 9 months of this gestation, then it's like, okay, now it's like the next piece on the program is I'm going to be born into the world. So I'm born into the world, but what's born into the world is a mass of cells and a mass of energy. And some cells have differentiated into skin cells, or they're going to be hair, or they're going to be muscle, or they're going to be part of my liver, or they're going to be whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But so a certain level of differentiation has happened by the time we're born. But what do we do then? We're born into the world and we flail. We're just flailing, movement everywhere. And this is information coming into the brain saying, oh, okay, these are all the possibilities of how I can move. And then eventually, oh my gosh, I differentiate that thing, that massive thing is mine. It's attached to me. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
and then I can have some kind of a awareness of movement, and then I can move it, and then I can differentiate control at a muscular level of my body. So differentiation is the learning adaptation of the brain to something new possibilities. And what happened for me was when I lost the left hemisphere, I could clearly then differentiate and get to know, well, what is going on in the right hemisphere? What does it feel like to be there? What is it good at? What is it masterful at? How does it work? What do the thinking cells do versus what do the limbic emotional cells do? They're very different. It's different tissue. And then as I had to use that all that I had, which was just my right hemisphere, to rebuild connection to those same groups of cells, the emotional cells of my past and future. It was gone. I had no past. I had no future. I had no experience. I had no feeling from remembering my past. And then my cognitive mind was disconnected. So all of my academic language was gone. So I had to rebuild the language. So the only difference between me and any other human being on the planet, because of what happened to me, was I have a clear differentiation of what are the functions of these different specific groups of cells that I can now say, okay, this is no longer, doesn't have to be unconscious anymore. We can actually consciously have an awareness of what's going on in those groups of cells. And then from here, we can grow into, okay, well, how do we get the whole brain? How do we capitalize on the strengths of all of these different groups of cells inside of the brain so that we can actually evolve ourselves to the next level of humanity?
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite remarkable because you mentioned this feeling of expansiveness where you go beyond. But just to understand, I don't know, because I think there's this social construct that most of us are trapped in, where we have this sense of ego and identity, and we kind of live through that perception of the world through the self. And you use this, and I think before we move on to the next part of the conversation, I think if you could just break it down in a very simple form into the 4 parts of the brain. I think for people who haven't read the book, they should anyway, but for this conversation to make sense for them. But I think there's this thing which I've heard about, and you talk about it as well, the working self, which we use, that's the ego, which we use to interact with humans and with our activities or with the real world, as many people might call it. Then you have the true self, which is pure and which is sort of divine in its existence, which connects to the larger consciousness. So this almost goes from you being a neuroanatomist, a neuroscientist, to the realm of spirituality. And how was that transition for you to say, hey, I've read about this in the form of cells. I know these cells, how they interact. There's a certain thing where the brain can adapt. It's a muscle that works. There's blood flow, etc., etc. And then you go into the space of the divine, and you go into the space. So maybe you can talk about this, but maybe before that, just to maybe you can address it, in whichever order you prefer, about how the brain is broken up into those. The thinking and the emotional in both hemispheres. But just this transition, maybe if you can talk about that before we get there.
So every ability we have is because we have brain cells that perform that function, period. You have to have a brain cell in order to move your finger. You have to have a brain cell in order to experience vision. You have to have a brain cell or a liver cell in order to filter nutrients from your what you bring into your body. So every ability we have. So my ability to have language, or to have a me, a center, I Jill Bolte Taylor, I'm a real person. These are my likes and these are my dislikes. This is my education. This is my family. This is my me. The whole world evolves around me. Well, that's the consciousness of my left hemisphere. I have to have a left hemisphere in order to have language, even the ability to have a name. I have to have the cells in my left hemisphere say to me, my name is Jill. I mean, otherwise, how do you know what your name is? You know what your name is because you have a group of cells telling you what your name is. You go home at night because you know where you live, because cells in your brain are telling you where you live. It creates a map inside of your head, and then you can follow that home to home. You know people in the world because you have cells telling you who, recognizing and telling you who those people are. But if you wipe out that left hemisphere, then you wipe out the skill sets of that left brain, which is evolved around me, the individual. Well, if I don't have me, the individual, what am I? Well, I'm still a life form. I'm still this magnificent mass of 50 trillion molecular geniuses, erased a group of cells in my brain about the size of a pea that says, oh, no, it's all about me, the individual, the ego. And it's like, well, wipe out those cells and you don't have an ego anymore. And you lose a whole bunch of information. And, to a lot of people, that feels traumatic. But for me, that's what happened. And I didn't have any say about it, but I lost Jill Bolte Taylor. She died that day. But in the absence of her, I wasn't dead. I was still alive. I still had some function. I was paralyzed on half of my body, but I was still conscious. And I no longer had the group of cells that defined the boundaries of where I began and where I ended. So I felt like I was an energy ball, literally as big as the universe, connected to the atoms and molecules as big as the universe. I have to have that group of cells in my left brain that define me, the individual, the boundaries of my physical body. I have to have that group of cells that says, call me Jill Bolte Taylor. And then I'm also going to file and pile into that file all of my likes and dislikes, etc. So the me, the individual, is in the left hemisphere, but in the absence of that left hemisphere, as I relate to me in relationship to the external world, the social norm, that's all in that left hemisphere. Get rid of the left hemisphere, and I simply am this magnificent power of energy around this organic mass in the present moment, big as the universe, and sharing consciousness with all that is, without all those details of the external world, because that's not what those cells are doing. So when you think about the differences between the two hemispheres, the right and the left hemispheres, first of all, they share no cell bodies. They communicate with some 300 million axonal fibers so that each one knows what's going on in the other hemisphere, but they cut those fibers and they're separate. So so they're two halves of a whole, and wipe out a half. And in the right hemisphere, all you have is the present moment, right here, right now. Bring your mind to the present moment. You have the ability to focus on your breath. It's a train running in the track of the present moment. So every modality that is going to bring you into the present moment, be that meditation or mantra or yoga or any of these techniques that bring you into the present moment, they focus on the breath because the breath is in the present moment. We don't breathe in the past. We don't breathe in the future. We breathe now. Bring my mind to the breath. I'm automatically here. Okay, if I'm in the present moment, I have to ask myself, how much time do you actually spend in the present moment? We spend so much time thinking about the past and routinizing about the past. We spend so much time in the future. We're all caught up in the unknown. How much time are we spending here and now? Now, on your side of the planet, maybe a little bit more than we are over here, because in the US, the Western way is in the left brain, and we're in the past and we're in the future.
We're inspired by the US, so we're following very close by.
Well, I know, and there's actually a very interesting conversation to be had, because your religions are based on the present moment experience. And so you're brought up in a culture that, and the only reason I know this is I talk to a lot of people. So, but in the India culture, you're trained about the awareness of the bigger picture and the relationship to the bigger picture. But it is true that the Western world has skewed even your thinking and your brain processing more into the left hemisphere. And so the ego now has become bigger than it naturally had, based on the construct of Eastern medicine, Eastern wisdoms, Eastern philosophies, Eastern ways of being. So the Western world truly has taken the Indian brain and other cultures and said, okay, we're going to skew it more to me, the individual, me, mine, what I want. And it becomes more of a we, they than your culture, cultural experience from your history has actually set you up for. So I know that there's an internal conflict
I
because
think
of
so to a
that.
certain extent, because the problem is I don't blame any one culture, because I think if people didn't have it in them, they wouldn't be sort of tempted. I think everyone has the ego is in everyone. And I think while there are traditional and ancient practices that sort of help you get past and connect with God, as you said, the power or the consciousness. But I think it's not it's something that every civilization, I think, has to go through, and I think India is going through it as much as the rest of the world with the divide of the pain and them versus us, etc. We just sort of seem to follow, and I'm not speaking on behalf of every Indian. I'm just observing what's going on around. But I want to ask you something before we move on. So, what you experienced that day when your left brain shut off and you lost all your identity as Jill Bolte Taylor, as an individual, as an ego, is that what a person with, say, dementia or Alzheimer's goes through? Because I have a couple of people in the family who are older and who have Alzheimer's, and everyone just seems to feel really bad for them, saying that person we knew is gone. But so I don't know. I mean, this is maybe a very naive question, but what is it similar? Because do they have any of this experience similar to yours? And if you can sort of talk me through that.
So I believe that dementia is a whole brain experience.
Okay.
But I think that and so for me, I lost the specific groups of cells saying, I am Jill Bolte Taylor. These are my likes and dislikes, etc. These are my relationships.
Right.
So in dementia, that unquestionably gets compromised, but there's something else compromised as well. In the right hemisphere that I didn't have compromised. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
However, most people, and if you look, I love this conversation. If you have someone who you love who has dementia, the loss is not theirs. The loss is yours because they don't remember you. They're good whether they remember you or not. But we
So they are good?
What?
They are good?
They're usually good.
Right.
Most of the people, when you run into these people, they're not weeping all the time with pain. They're not. They're simply not aware of the absence of being. Now, the process of deterioration is absolutely devastating for everybody. No question about it. The brain that has lost its attachment to those details has been devastated. No question about it. However, if I lose, I mean, when I lost my left hemisphere and I lost all those details, Jill fell off the Harvard ladder. I was climbing this golden ladder to a profession that was at Harvard Medical School. I mean, it was great. And then boom, in the course of 4 hours, I was now an infant in a woman's body, and everybody else is saying, oh my God, that's terrible. But my perspective of self was I was perfectly fine. I was no longer, the left brain was no longer how I was making judgment on the value of me as an individual. I had value simply because I was alive. And I would be sitting on my couch drooling and grinning, and my mother would say, child, how can you be so happy? And it was because I wasn't caught up in me and all the ego stuff.
But how do you communicate because your mom plays a big role in your recovery, and you speak about her in the book and how she recognized even that part of you, which you didn't recognize till a certain point. But how did you express that? Because it's immediate for people to say, oh, she's not well, and do something severe like medicate or whatever it may be. And so how did you tell especially the people around you who cared for you, that you were safe and you're not all gone and you're still there? You might not have that ego state or the social recognition of Dr. Jill Taylor, but you are there and you are still a being in some shape or form.
I simply was me. It's like, how do you know if a puppy is happy or not happy? right? You pay
Okay.
attention to the puppy, right? You
Right.
don't
Right.
ask it, right? You don't go poking and prodding. You simply look at a puppy and say, that's a sad puppy, right? Or that's a happy puppy, right? I was a puppy.
Right.
And
Right.
my mother cared enough to actually look at the puppy and say, this puppy is wounded. How do I help this puppy recover? First of all, regain strength, because I was all but dead. And how, we take it one step at a time, but she did it without a negative judgment. She did it with love.
That's
And if
amazing.
if
Yeah.
the puppy was tired and needed to sleep, well, she didn't poke me and make me eat or make me do something. She let me sleep. The puppy's tired. The brain of the puppy needs sleep, because it's processing. First of all, it's had this terrible trauma. It's got this major hemorrhage in the left hemisphere. The whole brain just needs sleep, and I'm clearly curled up in a fetal ball needing to go to sleep. So she let me sleep.
Right.
And then when I awoke, then she would feed me. She would get food into me. She would take me to the bathroom, let me take care of my needs, and then I'd be wiped out again. And then eventually I gained a little bit of strength. And then when I was strong enough, then she was innately available to teach me. But and so that's what she did. She just looked at the puppy and said, what does the puppy need?
No, that's amazing. Like the way you talk about your relationship with your mother in the book is quite, quite. I mean, it's very touching, of course, but just recognizing each other's strengths, and I think that's how. I think it's a place where now we can maybe, if you're okay, just sort of in a nutshell. I know it's hard to talk about in a nutshell, but just for people who haven't read the book and to understand, okay, so we have the brain, and I'm going to put it across as the layperson asking you this question, and I am the layperson, but okay, the brain, you've broken it down into two hemispheres, as you mentioned earlier. It's the right side of the brain, which is the feminine, and the left side, which is the masculine. And now you've said that there are, beyond just the thinking and the emotional in each hemisphere, each part has both emotional and thinking. So you give it characters, character 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you break it down into what these characters do. So how is, okay, maybe can you tell people just what these characters are and how you arrived at these characters?
Okay, so and I'm not going to start linearly. So the difference between, there are four characters inside of our brain. We have two emotional groups of cells, one in each hemisphere. We have two thinking groups of cells, one in each hemisphere. So what's the difference between the two hemispheres? These are the two biggest differences. The right hemisphere, it's right here, right now, present moment. Easy to remember. Right hemisphere, right here, right now, present moment. There's no past and there's no future. And the second big thing is that right here, right now, I'm as big as the universe. This is not about Jill Bolte Taylor, the individual. I have to have cells in the left brain for that. So the right hemisphere, it's right here, right now, and I'm a part of a collective whole. I'm part of humanity. I'm a living being that looks like you. Okay, left hemisphere has a past and a future. And because the left hemisphere has memories from my past and potential information about the unknown, then I am linearity across time. So I think methodically or linearly. A part of that is language. And a part of language is me, the individual. I am an individual. So I have cells in that hemisphere that define where do I begin and end. It has language cells that define my name, Jill Bolte Taylor, and then all the details of me in relationship to Jill Bolte Taylor. So me, the ego, is in the left hemisphere across time. So we have these two hemispheres then. The emotion of my past is all my pain from my past. My thinking left brain, which I call character 1. So now I'll do the four characters. Character 1 is about me, the individual, and my past and my future and my relationship to the external world. So character 1 is the rational thinking part of my brain. It's a group of cells in that left hemisphere. It defines me. Where do I begin? Where do I end? It has a past. It has a future. It has language, and it creates order in the external world so that I can have some semblance of order in my life as an individual. So the character one, it likes to create order. How does it do that? It analyzes information. It says, this is different from that. So we're going to call this, we're going to call that, and we're going to organize it. We're going to categorize it. We're going to define the social norm. What is right? What is wrong? What is good? What is bad? That's that character one. It gets punctual. It knows how to control time. It controls people, places, and things. And it got us here today on this date at this time, even though we're on opposite sides of the planet. Our character ones came online and said, okay, we're going to create order and we're going to connect at this time. All right. So that's character one, the rational thinking part of our brain. I call mine Helen. It's short for Hell on Wheels. She gets it done. Have you named your character one?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still in, the name I've given right now is Sandeep, because he's the guy that, it's strange. I was thinking of, I think you also take people through the naming process, like what you can use as leads to kind of give a name to the character.
Yes.
But mainly the thing is because I think this guy is, even though it's my real name, is this guy who sort of was on the back burner, put through the paces, and wants to sort of be a little more cautious and a little more careful, be a little bit more, I think, a good boy who gets stuff done, and kind of is more orderly, but at the same time has to sort of be a little bit more pleasing to get validation and all these things. So for now it's the character one, which is the functional member of society, which is the thing is which I use to sort of represent myself in the real world, is called Sandeep. But the next character is the troublemaker, because I've lived with him for many years. Character two. So I think that's that.
Character two is the emotion of that left hemisphere. It has a past. It's all the pain from the past, and it's all the fears of the future.
Yeah.
So character two is not existing in the present moment, but it's the emotion. And so what character two does is it brings information in from the present moment and it looks at it. So let's say a dog is approaching me and I look at the dog, and my character two looks at that dog and says, oh my God, that dog is not safe, because 50 years ago, when I was learning how to ride a bicycle, a dog that looked just like that was trying to bite me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, push it away and say no. So it's not just the pain of the past, it's the awareness of what's happening in the present moment that I need to push away from as a danger or a threat based on a lifetime of experience.
Right. So, and you talk about this, that it's not entirely bad, because of course, if there's a dog biting you every day and you're not learning from it, it's not healthy, right?
You gotta learn.
You gotta learn.
Yeah.
But the filter sometimes is more real than the reality, and that's a problem.
Oh, yeah. Just because I dated a guy who looked like you when I was 20 doesn't mean a guy like you, if I date you now, that all the alarms have to go off, because you're not that guy.
Yeah.
But isn't it nice that there's a part of my brain that is saying, walk slowly, go slowly, learn from our experiences.
Do you think with everything going on right now, and I'm going to deviate a little bit, because the next two parts are something which I'm really I'm really actually amazed by, the next two parts of the brain. But just before that, do you feel, and you mentioned this briefly, that is the case, that like everything from yesterday, I know it's maybe not at all in this space, but like from the celebrity worship, the celebrity gossip of Hollywood and the Oscars, the pain, the war, do you think there's an entire obsession with the left side of the brain, which has taken over the narrative of society? Do you have
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why when I say, there are fundamental differences between the Eastern culture and the Western culture. Is the Western culture is doing exactly what you're talking about. And the societal norm becomes what we worship, as opposed to the Eastern traditions that say, I'm good no matter what's going on outside of me. Where the left brain comes in and says, well, the external, excuse me, the external world has to look just like this in order for me to be good in it. So these are two completely different perceptions of how do we function and what are we validating and which group of values are we actually living? Are we living the value structure of the right brain, which is saying we are good no matter what's going on outside of us, or the value structure of, in order for me to be good, my house has to be this big, my bank account has to look this size, my friends have to be these beautiful people, and they all have to have these things too.
Yeah.
So the values of me, the individual, the left brain, is very different from the values of me as a part of the collective whole. So
Right.
so that's one of those fundamental differences.
Yeah, no, because the reason I brought this up at this point is because I think it's an important thing that I was trying to sort of wrap my head around is, of course, it's quite a straight, I wouldn't say simple, but it's really well laid out, right? You have, and honestly speaking, you can identify, if you have a little time to yourself and just think about it, you can identify certain traits that, and you lay it out really well. So, just to identify your characters in your brain. But I'm trying to sort of juxtapose that, or rather overlay that with what's going on in society today. I mean, of course, with the war, with the biggest pandemic after COVID being mental health, and the issue of course, from anxiety, depression to self-harm, to self-worth, to issues which, and I think it's the biggest industry. I think when people's peace of mind is a commodity. I think this is a point where I think what you are doing is so helpful, from addiction to suicide to self-harm. So maybe at this point, if we talk about why the right brain, or the right hemisphere, or the emotional part, because you use this very important thing, saying we're people who feel, who happen to think, as opposed to people who think, who happen to feel. So just at this point, saying, okay, you have this ego, and you have this sort of system that gives you a warning, saying this happened to you in the past, so be aware of what might happen. But we've taken that to going, this is going to happen again and again and again, and so we're constantly, in a sense, in state of threat. But why is it that it's so difficult, with all the advancements, that people aren't able to even acknowledge the fact that there is this thing within their brain, and they go straight into this way of thinking? And how can someone who doesn't know, okay, might not be a person who practices mindfulness or practices meditation, how do they recognize that there is this? Because I'm coming from a person who was in this place, and not being able to think beyond this, going, my God, my life is just this. It's this repeated flight or fight, this anxiety, this sort of sense of threat, and this sense of, oh my God, my life is going to come to an end if I don't do this. If I sit in a car, it's going, every scenario has a bad ending. So how would someone use the characters right now to sort of look at maybe the right hemisphere? And you clearly say none of these characters are bad. It's how you manage them, and you talk about how to do it in the book. So just for someone listening right now who senses a sense of lack of hopelessness, how do they, a sense of hopelessness, how do they kind of perceive themselves?
So let's shift into the consciousness of the right brain.
Yeah.
Because the right brain, it's right here, right now. And the emotional tissue is experiential. So character number 3 is this part of us that is simply experiential. What does it feel like? What's the temperature of the air where you are? How much humidity is in the air? What does it feel like to have the glasses or the earphones on you? You know, what is the experience of being alive? Can you breathe comfortably? Can you sit comfortably? Is there pain in your body in this moment at any time? And then it's this impetus toward, so there's this impetus toward action. I want to do something. I'm curious, and I'm curious about differences, not similarities. I'm focused on the similarities, but the differentiation inside of those similarities. So you're just like me in that you have 2 eyes, you have a nose, you have a mouth, you got limbs, you're much like me, but you're different about me, and I'm curious. I move toward you because you are different from me, and because you're different from me, I can learn from you, and I can grow in relationship with you, and
Yeah.
I can share with you, and I can actually grow as a human being. Where the left hemisphere, character 2, looks at you and says, that's different. That doesn't feel safe because that's different from me. So you have black hair, I have blonde hair, you're a man, I'm a woman. We have different religious beliefs, probably. We're different. We have different societal, cultural norms.
Yeah.
And so you're scary. I push you away. In the left hemisphere emotion, character 2, but in the right hemisphere, character 3, we're right here, right now, and I find you interesting. And so I move toward you with curiosity. And then it's like in that curiosity, the left brain is defining the social norm of right and wrong and good and bad, but the right hemisphere doesn't have that social norm. The right hemisphere just has the right here, right now.
The curiosity,
and so it's like,
right.
Yeah, so it's like in curiosity, in possibility. So we can brainstorm right now and come up with a great new idea and become entrepreneurs and invent something new because we're here in the present moment. We're not saying, oh, they tried that in the past and blah, 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 and that's not right. And mom's not going to like that. And oh, Lord, and all of that. So the right here, right now experience is one of the present moment. And as an emotional, one thing you said that is a quote from me is we are feeling creatures who think. We are feeling creatures who think because biologically the emotional tissue came in online on top of the reptilian brain. So the difference between a reptile and a mammal is that emotional tissue in each hemisphere, fight or flight in each hemisphere. And that fight or flight in the left hemisphere, about fight or flight, protect me, the individual, is character 2 tissue. And in the right hemisphere, the fight or flight is right here, right now, character 3 tissue. So character 3 is curious and innovative and interesting and new possibilities. And you're a comic, for gosh sake. You have to take information that is traditionally thought about and look at it in a skewed and interesting way that is humorous.
Yeah.
And that's how comedy comes in, is the ability to look at something through a different lens that allows the traditional mind to think, that was actually witty. That was actually
Or get slapped
funny.
while doing it.
Yeah, exactly. But that's humor, right?
That's
the right
humor.
hemisphere has humor. And then character 4 is that thinking tissue of that right hemisphere, right here, right now, connected to all that is. It's the consciousness in every cell of my body. And so I exist in a state of gratitude and awe simply because I exist at all. And it doesn't matter all those details of the external world. It doesn't matter who is there. What matters is that I am here and oh my God, I'm alive. And because I'm alive, the world is a better place simply because I'm alive, not because these are the things I do for society. I show up as the light of my life. I shine that as bright as I can, and other people then feel better in the presence of that light because it allows them to shine that light as well. So the difference between the here's the threat, here's Putin, here's a war, here's a virus, oh my God, left hemisphere, me, the individual, I could die. Well, yeah, I could, and at some point I will, but that's manufactured by a collection of cells in that hemisphere. When I really know who I am, when I exist as the consciousness of my character 4, and I know, oh my gosh, I'm alive. Wow, what a wonder I exist at all. And then one day I won't exist at all, but I would have lived. And so for me, that consciousness then dissolves out of the cellular structure, but that's the consciousness that created me. And so I continue to exist in the formation of some part of my character 4. So character 4 has no fear of life or death. It just exists like, oh my God, right now I do exist as these 50 trillion beautiful molecular geniuses, and lay on top of that consciousness of action of the character 3 with curiosity and movement into the world, and then add to that a left hemisphere that defines me, an individual, gives me a past, gives me a future, and then on top of that, an experience with the external as a social norm. And now I have all 4 consciousnesses of the 4 different parts of my brain. And when I truly know I'm as big as the universe and I am ultimately alive, and it's a blessing to be alive, and then boom, just like that, I won't be alive anymore. I'm good with that because I know that part of myself is real.
It's so fascinating that you mentioned this whole thing that we are living in fear of the unknown, fear of something, right? It could be a person of a different race, a person of a different gender, a person of a different geography. And the only thing that we are assured of in this life is death. But most of us, in the pursuit of being afraid of death, end up doing the most horrific things being alive. Whether it's the things we say, the things we do. So you had this experience where you said you lost everything that a human values or is taught to value, which is a sense of attachment, a sense of ego, and yet you were alive. So coming from you, what is that experience? Because people are, and everyone, I think that's something which you can ask anyone and they'll be like, yeah, I'm scared of dying. But what was that feeling for you? I mean, I don't know if you can say I came from the other side, but sorry if it's inappropriate, but I just want to understand because it's such a fascinating thing. And you speak about this power of operating your brain from the fourth character. And for the fourth people who don't know, the fourth character is this sense of the larger consciousness that we're all connected. And you live there and you operate and you function after your incident back in 1996. But I think just to, I don't know if you can simplify the concept, but it just sounds so remarkable, and I want to sort of understand what it feels like, because I think we're all trying to get there someday.
Well, okay, so picture yourself as these four different levels of consciousness. The consciousness of your character four, it's always there. You are as big as the universe. You are as big as the universe. Your energy. Energy doesn't stop and end at your skin. You are energy. And you're not just the energy of a tiny little microbial cell. That microbial cell that was you was half of the DNA from your mom egg cell, half of the DNA from dad's sperm cell, and then that cell multiplied literally at a rate of 250,000 new cells per second over the course of a 9-month gestation. You didn't just come in with the consciousness of that tiny little microbe, but that microbe had all the molecular genius that it needed to metamorphosize itself into those 50 trillion cells that would become you by the time you're born. Okay, so wow. I mean, if you can't just sit back and go, okay, wow. So what did I know when I was born? Yeah. Well, I knew something, right? I knew energy. I knew I was atoms and molecules. I was particles. I was big as the universe. I didn't have that group of cells in my left brain that said, oh no, this is me. Just here. This is me. No, you don't. You were born with so much more than that. So think about what's in that character one. The character one is language. Okay, get rid of language. Well, if you get rid of language, let's say you speak an Indian dialect and we drop you into China and you don't speak any Chinese. Well, can you still communicate? Well, at a certain level, fundamentally, you kind of can, but overall, the language is gone. So you're not philosophizing anymore about Putin or thinking about the threats of the future. You're right here, right now going, oh my God, I'm thirsty and I need to communicate. I'm thirsty. I need water, right? Yeah. So you find a way in the absence of language. And so that left brain gets kind of shut down and we shift into the emergency situation of the present moment. Okay, now I'm here. Now I'm on survival. Well, how do I do? And then let's say you're taken in by a nurturing family and you're being nurtured and loved and you're feeling that these people are caring. These people are concerned about you. They're loving you. They're supporting you. They're giving you what you need. They're letting you sleep. They're feeding you food. They're giving you nutrition. So imagine what it would be like to get out of you, the individual, into here I am in the present moment, and all those details about who I used to be in my other life don't matter anymore because that's gone, and what I have is right here. And in the here and now, there's a certain level of peacefulness as we get rid of our jobs and the need to satisfy that social norm, and oh my God, what a relief that is. And my relationships, and oh my gosh, as wonderful as they are, they're very stressful. Relationships are very stressful. They're this pull and push relationship and power struggle. So let's say those are all gone. And in the absence of all that, it's kind of a peaceful, blissful euphoria. in the present moment, it's like, oh my God, I'm alive. And I'm grateful that I'm alive. And in that sense of gratitude, all I have is this awareness of love and gratitude and appreciation. And then boom, if I lose that life, then wow, I lived. Boom, I'm gone. What am I now? I don't know. I didn't die that day. Pretty close, but not quite. So for me, the absence of that left hemisphere ego and everything that had to do with Jill Bolte Taylor was blissful euphoria. But why did I work then so hard? It took 8 years for me to use my right brain skills in order to rebuild the skills of the left brain. And what I realized was I was actually rebuilding these certain characters. And the character of the emotional tissue was pain and caution and awareness and alarm, alert. And I have a past and I have a future. Okay, I can learn and grow again emotionally. And then eventually I, the individual, came back online as me, Jill Bolte Taylor. And then I had to rebuild a world in the external world. And that was character 1 tissue. So I lost character 1 and character 2. I gained a clear awareness for 8 years on what character 3 and character 4 were. And then I used those skills to rebuild the skills, the cells, the connections between the cells in order to be able to regain abilities that then ended up with personalities. And I thought, whoa, that's interesting. And character 1 came back online and said, wow, I'm back. It's been 8 years and I want to be the boss again. And the rest of us are in here going, that wasn't what we were planning on doing. We like the blissful euphoria of gratitude and grace and allowing things to evolve very differently than that linearity of, okay, I have to make this work like this. And then it's like, well, how can we get all 4 of them to communicate with one another so I can live as a whole brain? And that's where the technique of the brain, BRAIN, as an acronym, brain huddle comes in order to be able to get all 4 of the characters to intercommunicate with one another. So everybody gets an opportunity to voice their wants and at the mic. And then we, as a collective whole inside of my head, make the decision of how are we going to be next. And as long as that character 4 is online, I'm going to be bringing my best self into every decision. I'm good with that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a remarkable concept because I think some people probably listening right now are like, wait, you mean that we have to have something as drastic as a stroke or a hemorrhage to explore our consciousness? But what this thing does, which is the breath, recognition, appreciation, inquiry, and navigation, that's the thing you just mentioned is brain. It gives you a way to sort of almost break your mind or your brain, into these 4 people and say, okay, who am I going to use? When am I going to use them? For what situation? And these 4 people are on my team and they're going to look out for me, and me being a part of the larger 4. It's really cool. I was thinking through the entire thing and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try it today. And it actually has worked. And it's quite a cool thing for people who, because sometimes in this entire journey of how do you silence the noise, it gets a bit overwhelming. And I think that's a really, really nice way you've done what you've done to help people who might not have had a chance to even think about their life in this particular way. So
yeah.
What is your plan with this? I mean, you clearly in the book mention about addiction and people in the prison system, but what more can people take out of this than they already? There's a tremendous amount of stuff they can take away from the book and from your story. But what can the future look like if we adapt and adopt certain attributes of what you've spoken about in the book, or maybe just all of it?
So the power of this material, in my opinion, boils down to the brain huddle that we just talked about, because we have the power to choose moment by moment who and how we want to be in the world, period. I have that power. You can come in and you can be yelling and screaming at me, and you can be unhappy and you can be aggressive. And I can look at you now as all 4 of my characters and I can say, oh my gosh, he's in his character too. He's in his pain. And then what do? I can jump right into my character too, and we can tit for tat and we can fight with one another, and aggression is never going to have a resolution.
Yeah, it's called social media.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Or I can step into my character 4 and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you're feeling the way that you're feeling." And I can hold the space for you, and I can let you do your venting, and do you need to vent? And or I can step in as my character 1 and say, "Is there something I can do to fix it?" Because that's what character 1s do. They step in and fix it. Character 2 step in and they kind of fuel the aggression. Character 3 is going to come in and it's going to bring comedy. It's going to bring wit. It's going to bring curiosity. And it's like, okay, do you need a hug? Do you need, what can I do? How can I connect with you and help you realize you're not alone? And then maybe you'll come out into your own right brain. But when I honor your 4 characters, when my 4 characters honor the 4 characters in you, then the 8 of us are in relationship with one another, and we're doing it consciously. And from the moment we think a thought, it stimulates an emotional response. We run a physiological response to what we're thinking and what we're feeling. From the beginning of that thought till the time that physiology is completely flushed through me and out of me takes less than 90 seconds. I can hold the space for another human being for 90 seconds. But
Yeah.
then you need to stop rethinking the thought that re-stimulates the emotional circuit, making you more and more angry for, hours, days, years, decades.
Yeah, it's terrifying because the thing is, as you mentioned, it's terrifying, yet there's sort of light at the end of the tunnel because when we look at, as you said, India, supposedly we have had a past where people were able to sort of look beyond themselves and see a sense of community and a sense of God, which has kept us, out of revolution or kept us, for the most part, not sort of going at each other's heads. But now more and more with this being thrown at us, this way of thinking, it's the ego, where it's greed, it's pursuit of material attachment. It's scary, honestly speaking. I don't know if you've traveled here, but like literally it can be traffic, I wouldn't say smoothly flowing, but traffic flowing, and then next thing you know, it's a massive fight and there's aggression. So this idea that, where it's not just living in isolation, where you might be amazing in the sense that you can meditate for an hour, but it's how do you coexist with others, right? Because you'll be able to meditate, but if someone comes in with their character, which is sort of inflammatory and one's sort of reaction and is hurting, it's so, and that's exactly why I sort of asked. It's so beautiful to understand. It's almost like a guidebook how to live, and you've also really well sort of charted these questions down where people can sort of identify their characters. So I just want to say thank you so much for. It's been an amazing journey to listen to, but I'm sure it hasn't been easy. So I really appreciate what you've done for yourself, and also, I think it takes a lot to share that with people after, because I mean, honestly, many of us, including me, would have been like, you know what, I'm tired. I just want to live my life. But it's beautiful hearing the idea of being in that larger consciousness and the bliss and the divine sort of feeling. So I'm glad you are in the space, and I'm really glad that you are doing what you're doing. And if you could just tell people who are listening right now where they could find both your books and, of course, that really, really big TED Talk, which I'm pretty sure most people have heard it, but if you could just drop the names of the books and where they could find them, that would be really good.
Sure.
And yeah.
Yeah, you can find anything about me at drjilltaylor.com. And the first book was called My Stroke of Insight. And the title of the TED Talk is called My Stroke of Insight. And it was the first TED Talk that ever went viral.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so Ted and I became simultaneously famous. And it was particularly, of particular value in the Eastern cultures, because here was a brain scientist talking about blissful euphoria, and in the absence of my left brain, actually finding nirvana. So, I think all of us, we're all on this journey to really, how do we live a whole brain life? How do we capitalize on the best of each of our 4 characters? And so the second book is titled Whole Brain Living. And the subtitle is The Anatomy of Choice, and the 4 characters that drive our life. So whole brain living, Dr. Jill Taylor. My middle name is Bolte, Bolte. So if you look up Jill Bolte Taylor, you'll find me on the internet.
I'm pretty sure we will, and I'll put all the details in the description. And
Thank
no,
you.
it's remarkable. I'm so glad that you could join me on this podcast, and it means a lot that you could share your story and everything that you are doing and continue to do to help people. And it's fantastic to hear from you today.
Thank you. It's been a joy. And, I appreciate, I always say, I love doing stand up, but I do neuro humor. Because nervous system, there's nothing funnier than what we are. And so you captivate that and captivate others with that. So thank you. I knew today would be interesting. I knew we'd go interesting places, and I'm grateful. So you take good care of yourself as well.
And you, Dr. Jill. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And till next time, thank you.
Thank you.